Welcome back to Velshi and Rule, where we are digging into all things 2020.
Potential candidate and former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz spoke out last night addressing concerns about his possible run as an independent candidate for president.
You are not going to win as an independent. That does not happen. But what you're going to do is you're going to have us have another 4 years of President Trump.
I can promise you I'm not going to do anything to be a so-called spoiler in all this.
I'm not sure how he can even say that.
You go. I'm not speaking. How can he think he's going to be anything but a spoiler?
I guess he is speaking. Joining us now at his big board, NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Okay, Steve. Last night, much to Ali Velshi's disagreement, Howard Schultz is saying he will be the first legitimate independent presidential candidate. What do you think? I mean, history's not on his side.
Well, in terms of an independent, look, the best an independent's done, going back more than a century at this point, you could say Teddy Roosevelt in 1912, more recently Ross Perot in 92. Let's just put them up on the board for you here. These are the independent candidates basically in the last half century who've made some kind of mark on election day. Go back to 68, George Wallace, heavily concentrated in the South. He got 14% nationally. John Anderson in 80. You had that Perot campaign in 92. That 19% of the popular vote that Perot got in 92. That's the best any independent's gotten since Teddy Roosevelt. So that's kind of the high watermark in modern times. You look, Pat Buchanan, Ralph Nader in 2000, not a big number, but 2000 was such a close election in the Electoral College and in the state of Florida. A lot of Democrats looked at those Nader votes and said, could that have come from Gore's hide? Of course, Pat Buchanan, there was this whole issue with the butterfly ballot in Palm Beach County, Florida. Did that make a difference? So you don't have to have a big number of votes, a big share of the votes to potentially make a difference. But the other question then is, you always get into that, actually win an election. Here's the other way of looking at it. These are the votes they got. How about electoral votes? Remember, ultimately, the presidency's not popular vote. It's electoral vote. Look, you got to go back to Wallace in 68. It really was a regional candidacy. He was a Southern candidate in 68, just after the Civil Rights Act, kind of riding the civil rights backlash among some white voters. He won states in the South, but you go after that, even Perot, getting 19% of the vote in 92, couldn't win a single state in 92. Basically, wasn't even coming in second place almost anywhere in 1992. So really, you're at if you're talking about Howard Schultz, there's all sorts of questions here. Could he get any traction at all? He'll certainly have a lot of money if he gets in this race. I look at Perot. He had a lot of money, too. Perot had a sort of a folksiness to him that I think really kind of caught on with people. I'm not sure Schultz has that. If he does catch on, if he does get traction, the question then, is it coming disproportionately from one side? A lot of Democrats are worried about that. I got to say, the history of these tells you, you can be surprised the effect, that they have. You assume they're going to draw from one side. They end up drawing from the other. Sometimes that happens, too.
So let me ask you this. There seems to be a number out there that people talk about, roughly 40% of people who don't identify with a political party. But even if you look at Ross Perot, he polled 19%, right? I've seen polling that says it's 12, 13, 14, 15, or 16% of people who are in the middle who say that the parties are too extreme for them. The 40% of people, if that's a real number, and you'd know better than I would, are not people who think, they're not all people who think the parties are too extreme. They think the parties may not be extreme enough for them. So how many people are actually in the middle for a guy who describes himself as a centrist, moderate candidate?
And it's an interesting question because then you start getting into this. How do you define the middle? What one person's definition of what the middle is doesn't necessarily align with what we sort of in the political media, the political world defines. There's always that question. But to take a look at Perot in 92, it's an interesting example because there are a lot of Republicans to this day who will tell you, and it's not just Republicans, but they'll tell you, hey, he was the spoiler. He cost Bush the second term. And that's because there was an element of the Perot vote in 92 and sort of the Perot activist base that you would identify with Pat Buchanan because of issues like trade. Perot was against NAFTA. He was against a lot of these free trade deals. He tapped into that. But I'll tell you, another big issue that Perot ran on in 1992, and you could see it again in 2020, the deficit, the national debt. Perot ran on that. And it was a Democrat in 92 who lost in the primaries, Paul Tsongas. That was his signature issue. Perot was bringing in a lot of those kind of suburbanite, those more college-educated Tsongas types in 92. What I'm trying to say is when you get an independent candidacy that gets traction, it can define itself as a centrist candidacy, but it can draw, as Perot did, from sort of different pockets. Buchanan and Tsongas, if you know those names, simultaneously in 92 was a funky coalition.
But everybody on your screen,
there you
everybody on your screen had a motivating through line to their candidacy. None of them ran because they were in the middle of the two parties.
Yeah, this is
I
the
don't know
thing.
what that means.
Well, what it means, it's interesting, is think about that issue of Ross Perot in 90. There was the differentiating issue for him, was trade.
That's what I mean, a
You know,
differentiating
Bush was
issue. Right.
negotiating NAFTA. Clinton said he'd be for NAFTA. And Perot was there saying, hey, they're stealing our jobs. It was kind of a Trumpian thing in 92. There was a populist element to it. It was also just sort of his nature. This was, you know, he would tell, hey, politicians in Washington, go fly coach, lose your baggage, have a bad meal, he would talk in a way, I think, that connected. I'm not sure that necessarily Howard Schultz has that, but we'll see. I think it looks like Howard Schultz, it's early right now. He's going to spend a few months seeing if he can get some traction. Remember with Perot, he said on Larry King Live in February 92, you know what, put me on the ballot, I'll run if you want me in the race. 3 months later, he was in first place in the polls. Let's see what happens with Howard Schultz 3 months from now.
Guy's too good. Everybody needs a Steve Kornacki, I always say.
But there's only one.
There's only one, and you only see him here. Steve Kornacki, thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.